The most terrifying weapon in the province that night wasn't a smuggled rifle or a stockpile of ammunition, but a familiar silhouette reflecting in the rear-view mirror. In the quiet coastal communities of Nova Scotia, there was a symbol people instinctively trusted, a white Ford Taurus with a distinct stripe, a symbol of safety designed to bring order to chaos. It moved through the darkness, unthreatening, just another patrol car on a routine beat. But behind the wheel, a plan was taking shape that would shatter the bedrock of public trust. For 13 hours, neighbors and strangers pulled over for this vehicle, believing help had arrived. Many never came back. April 18, 2020. Portapique is a place where the Atlantic Ocean meets the quiet solitude of the forest. It is a community of cottages, retirees, and people looking for distance from the noise of the world. It was quiet, unremarkable, the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors waved as they passed. But as the sun set that Saturday, the stillness was broken by the sound of gunfire and the glow of burning homes. What happened over the next 13 hours was the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history. 22 lives were taken. But the horror of this event isn't just found in the violence itself. It is found in the deception. The perpetrator, Gabriel Wortman, didn't just commit a crime. He performed a role. He wore the uniform of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He drove a vehicle that was, to the naked eye, a fully functioning RCMP cruiser. While he hunted, the institutions designed to protect the public remained paralyzed by confusion and rigid protocol. As smoke rose over Portapique, the only warning the public received came through a social media app that many of the victims did not use. The killer knew this. He used the authority of the state to entrap his victims, hiding in plain sight, exploiting the very instinct that tells us to trust the police. Today, we are looking into the abyss of that April night. We are not just recounting a timeline of tragedy. We are dissecting the forensic paradox of a killer who weaponized safety itself. We will examine the years of meticulous preparation, the failure of the public alert system, and the devastating consequences of silence. To understand the carnage, we must first understand construction. Gabriel Wortman was a denturist, a man whose profession required an obsessive attention to detail. He made things that looked real, things that fit perfectly to mask the imperfections beneath. But his obsession extended far beyond dental molds. He was a collector of authority. For years, he scoured auctions and surplus sales, buying decommissioned police motorcycles, uniforms, and equipment. To his neighbors, he was eccentric, perhaps a bit intense, but ultimately unthreatening. He was the man with the large garage, the man with money. But inside that garage, something dark was taking shape. In the fall of 2019, he purchased a retired RCMP Ford Taurus from a federal government auction. It was stripped of its markings, a hollow shell of its former authority. Most buyers would use it for parts or drive it as a civilian car. Wortman had a different purpose. He spent months sourcing the specific decals, the reflective striping, the light bar, and the push bumper. He didn't just want a car that looked like a police cruiser. He wanted a perfect replica. He applied the decals himself. He installed a partition. He secured the radar gun. Every detail was a calculated step toward absolute deception. This wasn't a crime of sudden passion. It was a project. He was building a Trojan horse. Witnesses who saw the car later would remark on its authenticity. It wasn't a rough imitation. It was indistinguishable from the real thing. He also acquired the uniform, the shirts, the pants with the yellow stripe, and the boots. When he put them on, he ceased to be a denturist with a history of violence and domestic abuse. He became an officer of the law. He knew this transformation would grant him access. It would grant him hesitation from his victims. It would buy him time. And in a rampage that would span over 100 kilometers, time was the only currency that mattered. The violence began shortly after 10 p.m. on April 18th. It started with a domestic assault, a brutal act against his common-law spouse. She escaped into the woods, hiding in the freezing cold, terrified that the man hunting her had the power of the police behind him. The first 911 calls came in minutes later. Residents of Portapique reported shots fired. They reported fires. And crucial to our understanding of this failure, they reported a police car. At 10:26 p.m., a caller stated, "There's a police car in the driveway." Another witness, hiding in their home while their neighbors were executed. Told dispatchers they saw what looked like an RCMP vehicle. When the real RCMP officers arrived, they were driving into a nightmare. Buildings were burning. Bodies lay in the streets and in homes. The chaos was absolute, but in the darkness, amidst the smoke and confusion, they were looking for a suspect. They were looking for a man. They were not yet fully aware that they were looking for a mirror image of themselves. The killer slipped out of the containment area. He drove his replica cruiser through the fields and back roads, navigating the terrain he knew better than the responding officers. He passed right by them, to a frantic officer in the dark. Seeing another cruiser is a sign of reinforcement, not a threat. The disguise worked perfectly. He left Portapic behind, leaving trail of death, and vanished into the night. This is where the tragedy shifts from the actions of one man to the inaction of a system. By the early hours of Sunday morning, the RCMP had interviewed the killer's spouse, who had emerged from the woods. She told them everything. She told them about the guns. She told them about the uniform. And most critically, she told them about the car. By roughly 6:30 a.m., the police had a photo of the replica cruiser. They knew he was driving a fully marked unit. They knew he was armed. And they knew he was at large. In modern emergency management, there is a tool designed for exactly this scenario, the Alert Ready system. It is the system that pushes a jarring, loud alarm to every cell phone in a specific area. It is used for Amber Alerts. It is used for natural disasters. It screams for attention because the situation demands it. But as the sun rose over Nova Scotia, the phones remained silent. Instead of a broadcast alert, the RCMP issued a tweet. At 8:02 a.m., over 10 hours after the shooting began, they posted, "Unfolding incident, firearms complaint." A tweet in a rural province where internet connectivity is spotty on a Sunday morning when people are sleeping in or having coffee. The police chose a platform that requires a user to actively seek out information. They treated an active shooter in a replica police car with the same urgency as a traffic accident. People woke up. They walked their dogs. They went to run errands. They had no idea that a man dressed as a police officer was driving down their roads, intending to kill them. They didn't need to worry, they thought. If there was a danger, surely they would know. Surely the silence meant safety. But the silence was a lie. Imagine you are driving down a quiet highway. You see a police car approaching. It turns around. The lights flicker on. What is your instinct? You pull over. You lower your window. You prepare to ask, "Is everything okay, officer?" This is a forensic paradox that makes this case so uniquely harrowing. The killer didn't have to chase his victims. He used their obedience against them. He exploited the social contract that holds our communities together. On Sunday morning, miles away from Portapic, the killer resumed his rampage. He pulled over random drivers. He pulled over people he knew. Lillian Campbell was out for a walk. She was a gentle soul, a neighbor. She saw a police officer. She likely felt a moment of relief, or perhaps curiosity. She never came back. Heather O'Brien and Kristen Beaton were nurses, women who dedicated their lives to care. Kristen was pregnant. She was driving between home care visits. She was on the phone with her husband. She told him there was a police car behind her. She thought she was being stopped, perhaps to be warned about the very danger she was driving into. Her husband, who had heard about the shooting on Facebook, not from an official alert, but from social media rumors, warned her, but it was too late. She had already pulled over. She trusted the stripes. She trusted the uniform. The killer walked up to the window. He didn't need speed. He didn't need stealth. He had the disguise. The psychological horror of those final moments is unbearable to contemplate. The realization that the person sworn to protect you is the one ending your life. It wasn't until 10:17 a.m., 12 hours after the first shot and hours after the police had the photo, that the RCMP finally tweeted that the suspect was driving a replica cruiser. By then, the killer had traveled nearly 100 kilometers. He had killed multiple people who had pulled over for him. If that alert had gone out at 7 a.m., screaming to every phone in the province, "Do not pull over. Suspect driving fake police here," how many lives would have been saved? The failure wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a failure of imagination. The authorities could not conceive that the threat was wearing their face. They hesitated to undermine the public's trust in the police symbol, and in doing so, they allowed that symbol to become a murder weapon. The rampage ended not with a grand tactical maneuver, but with a coincidence. After abandoning his replica cruiser, which he had set on fire, and stealing 2 other vehicles, the killer pulled into a gas station in Enfield to refuel a stolen Mazda. At the adjacent pump, a tactical team had stopped to refuel. It was chance, a moment of divine intervention in a saga of systemic failure. An officer recognized him, not by the car, which was gone, but by the face that had finally been circulated. The confrontation was brief. The killer was shot and killed. The violence ended, but the silence that followed was heavy with unanswered questions. In the days and months that followed, the province of Nova Scotia mourned. But grief quickly turned to anger. The public learned about the replica car. They learned about the delay in the warning. They learned that the tools to save lives existed, but remained unused in the toolbox. An inquiry was launched. It revealed a chaotic command structure, poor communication, and a reluctance to use the alert-ready system. It exposed that the police were fighting a war with analog tactics in a digital age. The replica cruiser is gone, burned to ash on a back road, but the shadow it casts remains. This case forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the symbols we trust. It forces us to confront the reality that compliance can be fatal. The killer was a man who spent his life mimicking authority because he craved the power it held. He built a shell of respectability to hide a monster, and for 13 hours, the system helped him keep that mask in place by refusing to speak. What do you think still remains unresolved in this case? Do you believe justice was ever truly served for the families who were left in the dark? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments. And if you want to explore more stories like this, stories that demand reflection as much as they demand attention, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications because the darkest crimes don't end when the killer is gone. They end when we finally listen.